Let's talk for and about the LGBT communities around the world. I'm Michael Ross, and this is Straight Friendly. She's a community engagement professional and is the founder and executive director of JQT Vancouver, a 100% volunteer-run Jewish, queer, and trans charitable nonprofit in Canada dedicated to queering Jewish spaces and Jewifying queer spaces. Carmel Tanaka, hello, hello.
Hi,
Good to have you here.
thanks for having me.
Oh my God, we're just doing it. Carmel, I'm so glad to have you here. And I just started, I landed somehow on you once I only arrived
Huh.
to Canada after a whole year of nomading all around after this crazy year that started. And here then I found some little sister almost, I would say. Where we've been sharing so many stuff. I will never, never, ever forget our first conversation. I felt like some of ours listeners should also have the privilege of a bit talking with you. So I'm really, really, really glad, my dear.
I'm honored. You know, you were in the middle of nowhere, Hope, British Columbia, when you contacted me. And so I just feel like we connected so beautifully, and I'm excited to continue.
And we found so many things in common, and we will be talking here, of course, about JQT and also about your activism, which is involving so many different subjects, but all of them are very interesting. But I have to say that I connected with you by soul. You know, it's not only about an interest about a subject. And actually, I'm just now telling you a surprise that, and Carmel had no idea before, that I'm also launching a new podcast about Jewish LGBTQ life. And you're actually one of the very first guests. And surprise! So welcome both to Straight Friendly Global, but also to this new podcast about Jewish life, LGBTQ Jewish life around the world. And it was important for me to start with you because the first time we talked, there was this kind of last connection of oh my God, someone here really can understand me and I can really understand that other person without even meeting each other before, right?
Oh, Mazel Tov. This is so exciting.
Mazal tov, kapara, kapara.
Yeah, let's do this.
Luckily, we are recording remotely, so I cannot just jump on you and hug you, okay?
I
So
can do
we
a
will be
few.
talking
Yeah.
about, yes, a virtual hug, a virtual hug. So we'll be talking about JQT. There are so many stuff that we have to talk about. And also, for you, I discovered also something which I've never knew about, and it's this term of Japanese. So we have to start with that. I mean, tell us a bit, because Carmel is really like a combination of so many different identities and opinions, and yalla, let's start.
I'll take it away. For those who are watching or listening, my full name is Carmel Tanaka. And so my first name is Hebrew and my last name is Japanese. My mother is Ashkenazi Israeli from Haifa. And so there's no surprise that I would be named Carmel after the mountain. And then my father is Japanese Canadian, third generation. So that makes me a Yonsei, a fourth generation Japanese Canadian. And I've recently discovered that they come from a prefecture 100 to 120 years ago called Fukuoka on Kyushu Island of Japan.
Wow, wow. Tell me, did you invent that term of a Japanese, or how did you find that? I love that.
So that's a great question. I'm working on an oral history project called the Japanese Project, where I interview Jewish and Japanese individuals, couples, and families all over the world. So far, I've got over 80 plus interviews. And the first time I heard this term, Japanese, I probably was in actually University of Tel Aviv. So this would have been circa 2005, 2006. There was a lovely student from California, San Diego, who introduced me to this term, and I latched onto it immediately because this felt appropriate to say Japanese as opposed to half Japanese and half Jewish, or these fractions, which I'm neither. I'm fully Jewish and I'm fully Japanese. However, during the interviews of the oral history project, some people started to take claim for being the first to coin the term Japanese. So there isn't a consensus on who started it, but I can tell you for sure it started in California, early 2000s.
Oh wow, wow, that's so interesting, and like you're involved in so many different subjects, and also with your name Carmel, like we found some similarities with East European background apparently. Also, living in Israel, I was born and raised in Israel. For you, it was definitely like living for several years, right? And also in some other parts of the country. And actually, my last stop in Israel was Haifa as well. And I think that also what we found in common, and I felt very comfortable talking with you, it's about the crazy year after October 7th. Now, I know that this is not the focus of our episode now, but I think that this is something that we cannot deny or ignore
Ignore.
because yes, it's like affecting all of us, and some of the listeners are maybe not in that much in the field, and maybe I think it is important that we will be a bit sharing. I have to say that until recent year, I had a rule that I'm not dealing with politics and political parties or politicians in my podcasts, and I'm avoiding some subjects. But with the Israeli one, maybe I was a bit more tricky, but with the English one, I didn't. And I think it's like the last year I'm not sure if I have enough words to explain my feelings, my thoughts, especially in the intersection of the Jewish identities and the LGBTQ plus identities and the so many different identities, which I think which is what is very beautiful. But for me, as someone who was, but his ex-boyfriend is Israeli Palestinian, I felt like that a lot of the discourse, like I couldn't really be myself since October 7th. Really couldn't be completely myself, neither in Israel, neither abroad, without canceling some of the stuff. And I didn't want to. And also, as what you said about being, let's say, a Japanese, it's not about being half-half. It's full of this and that. So, and this is something which I think is very, very interesting. And I'm an Israeli who's just suddenly exploring Canada and some other countries, and I'm still learning. But I think that from your side, like you have some different perspective or experience than I have. Although that we've been a few years in Israel, and although we do share some similar stuff, but I want to like, what is your perspective and feeling like? What was for you that year, and how do you combine your activism, your views, with some stuff that for some people might seem as contradicting each other? Not from my side, by the way.
Oof, what a question. I mean, how much time you got? Um, it's been a really difficult year for me personally, and I have seen how it impacts me in a negative way, but also a lot of my community members, particularly in the Jewish and queer community. I can dive into how that affects me professionally in a minute, but I'm going to take a moment to talk about how it was for me personally. Um, I'm one of the very few Israelis that I know in the Jewish queer community in Vancouver, where I reside, where I live. And so my connection to um, Israelis and who attended, say, for example, the Nova Party, or who has been impacted by the continuing war, is different for than a lot of other people that are here. Um, I have deeply personal connections. My first cousin's son was in attendance at the party. Um, and since then, I've learned of friends and family friends who have been all impacted. And of course, my family and friends live in bomb shelters these days. So that was my immediate experience, was just wanting to make sure that my family and friends were safe. While a lot of people here were starting to um, turn to activism, protesting, wanting to uh, stop what's going on. And I wasn't in that mental space yet. I was still just on WhatsApp. I was messaging friends, just seeing if they're alive. I was in a very different place. Um, and it was tough because they tell you to help with your mental health, go on walks, go outside. And every time I would go out, I would see stickers on lampposts or posters of the hostages being defaced with swastikas or ripped from vandals. So it didn't matter where I went, in order to free my mind, I was constantly reminded and inundated and re-triggered. So there was nowhere other than my own home, the safety of my own home. And as a result, I hermited for a year inside my little hobbit hole here in Vancouver. And my social circle became, and still remains, quite small, only to a trusted few. Those who are have a capacity to feel compassion for all victims of the war, not just one group, who have the ability to offer or think with critical thinking and nuanced ideas and perspectives, and are not interested in mansplaining you or trying to change and waver your personal experience, or trying to tell you that your pain doesn't matter. Yeah, so there's that. So that was my personal experience, which came along with both family and friendship ruptures, because not everyone has or shares the same opinion across the board. And I recognize that there's a full spectrum of opinion in the Jewish community and also outside of the Jewish community, although it feels very one-sided these days outside of the Jewish community. And so then professionally, running a Jewish queer and trans charitable nonprofit during this time has presented itself with immense challenges, pressure from both the Jewish community as well as the queer community to take a particular stance on the conflict. And at JQT, we don't. Our stance is that we acknowledge that there's a full breadth of experiences, opinions, and some people don't even want to express an opinion. They for them it's a non-issue. They've never set foot in Israel. For them, it's a moot point. So our focus is to ensure that we create safer queer Jewish spaces so that queer Jewish people can celebrate all of themselves and not have to hide any one particular identity in order to fit in.
I think that many people don't even realize the there's so much of pressure that so many of us are going through. I mean, first of all, especially for people who, I think that for any human, and I so much agree with you that it's like it's about human rights, it's about human life, and this kind of discourse of choosing sides, like it's some football game, and that so for some people or groups that are not even personally involved, with that, but they have a very strong opinion. And I would say that also for me, there was some feeling of even some kind of betray, because if you are a human rights activist, you are a human rights activist, not only one kind of human, or make the differentiation. So, so yeah, and I can say that as an Israeli, but I've been always very much in contact. I've been always traveling a lot. I've been always working on expanding my views. And for instance, for me, what is very, very impactful was the discovering almost a decade ago the CBST, the Queer Synagogue in New York. That was the place for me where, for the first time, I could connect between both my gay queer identities with my Jewish identities. And in Israel, the discourse is very much, it's like, it's you're either queer, secular completely, or you're like Orthodox. Like it's very difficult to find something in between. And I thought that I'm more open and more, like, many times in my Hebrew podcast, I talk about those experiences from that I had in those synagogues, especially also this year. And I went also to Toronto. In Canada, it's very different than the US. We'll talk also about that. But also, this year, I learned that maybe I'm not so close to some of the communities that I thought or was hoping for. And for me, what I learned during the last months, including here while being in Canada, and I do find Canada to be very liberal compared to many countries, let's say. But at the same time, I also discovered that the Israeli communities and the Jewish communities are not necessarily the same, right? So how do you see it from your side? And I think maybe, like, I only now realize that you said that, like, the fact that you know personally some people who've been affected, which is also my case. And I think, I'm not sure if we even talked about it, but maybe because we look at the situation as something which is also personal, like something which is like, we know the human beings. So maybe this makes for us the views to be more complicated and difficult, but maybe more close to reality than some
Well,
of the
yeah, we don't
other.
see them as football players. We see them as our family and friends, which is very different. And I think that would change a lot of people's perspectives if it were their family and friends who were being directly impacted. Um, you're talking about what my views are or stances on, Jewish community in Canada. I mean, we could get into some typical Canadian politics, which is, East Coast versus West Coast. We could talk about city versus rural points of views. I mean, there's a huge diversity within Canada alone, lots of different people. But within the Jewish community, I would say that there's many different denominations, there's many different subgroups. But all in all, I would say the majority is more conservative than what you would find in the US. In fact, on most issues when it comes to same sex marriage or to intermarriage, God forbid, we are definitely 10 to 15 years behind some of the more progressive Jewish movements in the US here in Canada. So I'm not surprised that your experience being here in a liberal progressive country and experiencing some Jewish conservatism. That is for sure. Although many would say that West Coast Jewish community is more progressive and liberal. I mean, I've spent time in Toronto, I've spent time in Montreal, and very much feels same in many ways.
And you've been
Yeah.
also living in the US, if I remember correct,
Yeah, San Francisco.
and in so many places. Maybe also one more thing that what is connecting between us. And I think it's also important to mention the fact that like Canada is huge. Like it's when I took a flight from Vancouver to Toronto, I was sure it will be like half an hour, 1 hour. I didn't realize it's gonna be
It's
more
halfway
than five
across the
hours.
world.
But like we say the term community, but it's not like just as I say with LGBTQ plus communities, and it's not one community. There are many different communities, and that's the thing what's also beautiful, the diversities around that. And also from my research, so in Toronto, we have around 300,000 Jewish people, while in Vancouver, in the West Coast, it is way, 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 way smaller. Like almost like just only, if I remember correct, it's around only 10% of that. Like the statistics are were conducted before the Hamas Israel war and the Hezbollah war. And probably it's changing because there are so many Israelis arriving now to Canada due to its policies and the war visa, both for Israelis and for Palestinians. So even when talking about Vancouver, it's still like you think that it's like a very progressive or West and big community, but actually it's quite of a small community, right? Communities. And you're saying that it's also 15 years behind. I didn't know that, by the way, at all. And I talk with so
I'll
many
give you
activists
an
around here.
example. So, intermarriage in the reform movement in the US, well, they accept that. They also accept patrilineal Jews, but that's not the case here. There's now efforts to move forward
What I'm sorry, the
with that.
patrilineal Jews? What do you mean?
Yeah, so to recognize Jewish people who have, say, a father who is Jewish and a mother that is not, but to still consider them to be Jewish.
So in Canada, what it's like compared to US or in the reform movement?
The reform movement doesn't recognize patrilineal descent in Canada yet, and it's up to the boards of each synagogue. I mean, as a national movement, as the reform movement in North America, they do recognize it, but it's still up to each synagogue.
The production of this episode came to reality thanks to the support of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom in Jerusalem.
So, whenever I talk with entrepreneurs, or what I like to call change makers, because entrepreneurship is not only about startups, but it's also about creating nonprofits, campaigns. And I always say, and it took me lots of years to realize that change making also starts with some internal change making, with some self development. And it's very important that for change makers that are affecting other people, that we will start also from ourselves, let's say. And it starts by always like, from what I find, that best entrepreneurs or change makers are those who solve or try to solve real problems and not just go and try to make money or not. And like we are now talking about JQT, which is a 100% only volunteers. I wish for you and hope for you that it will enlarge to much more than that and not only volunteers, because you're doing something very, very, very important. And I wanted to ask first is what problem or problems you saw, maybe first of all, from your side, your personal view as a change maker, but also, of course, the problems that you saw that other people are facing with. So, what were these problems that led to the solution of creating JQT?
Oh, this is a multi-pronged answer, so I hope you're ready. So I first got involved with Jewish LGBTQ celebration of Pride when I was working professionally in community engagement in the Jewish community. Pride, Vancouver Pride particularly, and the marching in Pride was part of my roster. It was one of my files, and I felt very honored to be the person behind the scenes to organize this. And in many ways, um, at the time, I wasn't out as queer yet, even though I led a very queer life already up until that point. I thought I had bypassed the need to have a coming out story. I thought we had progressed far enough in society where my friends and family already knew. I wasn't hiding it, nor was I attaching to a particular letter. So in many ways, I guess I was a Trojan horse for the Jewish community. But I also did it because, and I think this is something that we have talked about, my dear cousin, Nir Katz, in Tel Aviv was murdered in a shooting, the Bar Noir shooting, and he was murdered because of homophobia. And it really impacted me and just in general, the rights of LGBTQ people and, being free to love whomever they want to love. And so this was a way to honor his memory. And so JQT actually developed out of me recognizing that we're not just queer or part of the LGBTQ community for one day or 1 week or 1 month out of the year. It's 365 days of the year. And I was already, I guess, anti-performative allyship back then. And so in 2018, I organized a group of queer and trans Jewish people to hold conversations around, what do we need throughout the rest of the year. And that's how JQT started. It was in Nir Katz's memory, and initially, and he was a huge supporter of wanting to help youth who were questioning their identity. And so this, for me, felt like a very natural way to honor him. And then, as we developed from just a grassroots community, just a small group of volunteers, into a charity today, we've now really expanded and through proper community assessments, and speaking with our community, we now know what the needs of our community are. So, for example, proper inclusion of Jewish, queer, and trans seniors. We didn't realize up until, what was it, COVID 2020, when we did an oral history project interviewing elders in our community, we started to hear them share their fears of having to go back twofold into the closet. Once because they're part of the LGBTQ community, and also because they're Jewish. And that's when we learned that long-term care homes, hospice care, even the hospital is very Christian-centric here in BC. And there were demands or requests from our elders to create Jewish, queer, and trans-friendly housing for them. And as a group of volunteers with, at the time, $500 in our bank account, we knew that that was not possible to achieve. Building care homes can be a 20-year project, costs tons of money. So we knew that our best efforts were to advocate and to make changes with existing institutions and the existing infrastructure for senior care in our province. And that led to the formation of the JQT Seniors Initiative, a seniors resource guide, which essentially provides information of what a Jewish, queer, and trans senior in BC can and cannot plan for in the year 2023, at the time now 2024, when it comes to Jewish burial, dying, last rites. In a Jewish context, this is, burial with Chaver Kadisha. Will their trans and non-binary bodies be respected in both the liturgy and in the ground and in ceremony? And it's complicated because a lot of people who are in the JQT community and also the greater Jewish community here in North America are in mixed marriages. And intermarriage may be okay in life as long as you're paying membership dues to the various different synagogues. But in death, this becomes a very taboo subject because your non-Jewish partner that you've shared your life with, who has come to synagogue with you, your children have been a part of synagogue life, that person is not allowed to be buried with you. It could be in an adjacent cemetery that might be married to a synagogue cemetery if you're lucky, but it's usually not within the cemetery grounds of a Jewish cemetery. And so people don't know this until the time comes, their death comes, and family members need to rush extremely quickly. They have 24 hours before the body needs to go into the ground. And in that time, that is not long enough to educate yourself on what can and cannot be available to you in a Jewish and queer and trans context. So we asked the hard questions on behalf of our community and put it into a resource guide that allows people to make informed decisions. And the best thing to have come from this is people now, I think, have less anxiety because there were a lot of unknowns before. Not everyone is a member, a paying member of a Jewish synagogue, and many are unaffiliated and just simply didn't think that a Jewish burial was possible for them. And now they know it is possible with some concessions, but now they have to navigate if their non-Jewish partner can also be with them. So little by little, we do have, some recent wins. The Chaver Kadisha here in Vancouver, preemptively as a member of the JQT Seniors Initiative, has accepted non-binary liturgy in advance of a non-binary death. They know, and we told them, more trans and more non-binary people will be dying in the Jewish community moving forward. Best to prepare now, rather than feel this rush to create an ad hoc committee to figure out how to do this. Everything's super rush. When someone dies, do it before someone dies.
I see this even as something which is a very Jewish thing to do. Like sometimes there can be this discourse about is it Jewish or not Jewish? Is it like according to the halacha or not? But I think if going to our essence, actually, like kvod hamet, the respect of the dead, is so much important that actually what you're doing here is about actually touching the very base of being Jewish and the Jewish culture, and I think it is much stronger and more important than, I'm quite sure that Kvod Hamet is more important than someone's identity, in my opinion. Like what you're doing actually, you're transforming Chevrat Kadisha to be even more Jewish than it is in some way. It is more liberal, but it is more Jewish in some way, no?
I'm really impressed, to be honest, that I even received answers from some of the most Orthodox stakeholders when it comes to Jewish burial and death, that they respected JQT and my position enough to provide this answer. And I do think it's because death is the most important issue. And being able to educate not only the Jewish community on the importance of being buried Jewishly for those who want to be buried Jewishly, but also we can, in advance of death, help healthcare. People who are caregivers, who are providing medical assistance, who are providing emotional assistance, spiritual assistance to seniors, so that they can be able to provide more inclusive care for Jewish, queer, and trans seniors. Right now, in our provincial healthcare, no healthcare authority asks if someone is part of the LGBTQ community. And so they don't even know. And I understand that person-centered care is a hot, trendy word these days in healthcare. How can you be truly providing person-centered care if you don't know one of the identities of the people that you're caring for? And the argument that we keep hearing from healthcare providers is, you're a human with blood and a heartbeat, and we will provide you the same care no matter who you are. However, that might not meet the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual needs of the individual. So, and we know that our work can be translated into any particular community that has more than one identity, that is not part of the Christian-centric majority here in Canada. So we're optimistic that this will be used in a way to help educate people. We're offering training now of healthcare providers. Yeah, I had no idea that I would be going from an events-based JQT group of volunteers where just trying to find my bashert to social services and offering support to some of the most marginalized people in our community.
And for me, it sounds like that there's still so much more to do. And from what I've been learning, like Canada is, it's not only big geographically, but we're talking about around more than 40 million citizens that live here. And for me, it was very surprising, I have to say, that when I was looking for a queer synagogue, I found only one. And, I would compare it a little bit with the hospitals, for instance. And when it, of course, there's, it's very difficult to make comparison between a death and life institute like a hospital with something which is more spiritual and maybe so only social, I think, or not only like a synagogue. Also, for me, I would say, like, it's like many times people ask, why do you need your own synagogue? Why do you need your own stuff? I mean, like, first of all, if there are some stuff, it means that there is a demand, that there is a need. So if there is a need and it happens, sounds probably that it's natural, in my view at least. That's also what Yuval Noah Harari says quite a lot in his historical books. And I would say that for me, it was very surprising that, according to my research, and we've been talking about it together, and I've been also talking with the cantor of Shir Libenu in Toronto, but it seems like from
Cheryl.
Cheryl, she's really, 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 really amazing. And like that, I went there, by the way, twice, also for Yom Kippur. And I cannot explain how much it is much more spiritual, when, for me at least, being in a place where it is more targeted towards you, you know. And I understand that there are some synagogues which are friendly and opening up. Thank you. Took some time, but my perspective, and also as the name of my podcast and stuff, is a straight friendly perspective. I mean, like, there's something very strong with the fact that, like, it's queer and it's also friendly for the others. I think that statement is important, and seems like we still have lots of steps to do. Surprisingly, also here in Canada, that it's let's say adoption rights here are much better than in Israel. Like it's almost full, you know. Like it seems like for an Israeli arriving here, what? It's all probably perfect and stuff. No, things are a bit more complicated in reality.
I have something to share with you. It's not going to change the narrative that we've just created, but it will offer just more complexity into this conversation. So, one of the things that I want to dive deeper into, and this was part of the oral history project I did for JQT, was to document adoption and surrogacy to Jewish families here in BC. And one of the most interesting finds I found is typically Israeli men who are at the time were looking to expand their families were able to have their children converted in conservative synagogues before same-sex marriage was even allowed in the conservative movement.
Oh wow! How
Which is
come?
fascinating. And you would think, well, we know that conservative conversions are the ones that are recognized along with Orthodox conversions by Israel, and that reform and reconstructionist renewal, maybe reform now, but at least I know historically did not consider those to be full Jewish conversions. But this is an interesting point that, you know, the first same-sex marriage in a conservative movement that was recognized um, was in 2020 here in Vancouver. There were before in Victoria, but, you know, Oh, this is all outlined in the Oral History Project, which I really recommend people to check out. It's at jqtvancouver.ca. We really document the 100 years of Jewish queer and trans history, all the different synagogues and denominations at different times trying to advocate for it, going ahead with some ceremonies that split communities in half. And then, this is all documented in the Jewish archives too, which is really wonderful that the Jewish newspapers at the time were recording this feud. And of course, there were splinter communities and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, all of this is shown that in Vancouver, at the very least, the first officially recognized gay marriage was in 2020, or at least during early days of the pandemic. And there were conversions of Jewish children to queer Israeli families prior to that. So that's fascinating.
That's really, really, really interesting. We will also leave here the links, Cameron. You will send me the links, and also we will try to put it also in the description of this episode that people will be able to see also. And I would also ask, how can people be involved or assist to your activism and the very important issues that you are dealing with?
The simplest way would be to visit our website, jqtvancouver.ca. There's contact details there. Send us an email. Let us know, if you're a local in Vancouver, even if you are not local to Vancouver. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's involved in the JQT Seniors Initiative, in our mental health support series. There's lots going on at JQT, and we don't pretend to be a cross Canada organization, as there are other Jewish queer groups in Canada. However, that doesn't mean just because you don't live locally in Vancouver, you can't help us out.
Yeah, so also let's say like you're looking for donations, for buying like or like signing up for a newsletter, social media, how people can be engaged and help with what you do, and also some of the stuff. Let's say the cooperation is also very important. So what else can people do to be part of what you're doing, to be part of the solutions?
We have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up for on our website. You can also make a monthly donation or even a one-time donation. We'll accept your money. We are Canada's first homegrown Jewish queer and trans charity. So we are able to offer tax receipts, which is a huge win for us. It takes a long time to become a charity or to be designated as a charity. We're
Mazal
very
tov, I
honored.
would say.
Thank you. Thank you. It's taken many years. We've been since 2018.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow, wow.
long time.
Carmel, we're about to get to the end of the episode actually, and I would say that I had no idea actually about the story of Nir Katz and the fact that you are related. We've been talking quite a lot, but I didn't know about that, and I think that like also the fact that it led you also like like there's a lot of pain in this word, and we are recording it in a time of lots of pain and death and brutality. And, it's like a bit Mishoah Tkuma, from Holocaust to revival, or from pain to change making. I had no idea. So actually I feel very privileged now because first of all, I believe in it, that if there's a pain, the best way is to do tikkun olam from that, like to make the world to be a better place. Unfortunately, we're also now in times that we see how for some people, activists, that the position that they get to, they're not necessarily empowering others, and I think so that it's not something that can be taken as granted. And for me, actually, that event that was very impactful for me. For those who don't know, in Israel, on in 2009, August 2009. I really remember that it was just around the week that my grandmother passed away. So it was like 1 week of being in the Shiva of my grandmother. And at the same time, there was this horrible shooting at one of Tel Aviv's youth gay center at the Bar Noar, which was a youth club for teenagers who are LGBTQ plus. And up until today, this issue, this horrible crime, was not completely discovered in terms of like we still don't completely know who's the horrible person behind that. And there was a shooting there. Two of the volunteers there passed away, and one of them is Nir Katz. So yeah, I think it's important to remember. It's important to remember. It's also important to do tikkun out of the pain. So thank you, Carmel. I didn't know. I was thinking
last
about them a
text
lot.
message, by the way. Oh,
Yeah.
his last text message to me was just a few days before. He was planning his wedding to Mas. And we all used to live together in Give a Time. Mir was my closest cousin, not in blood relation, but in like we were similar age. And we lived together while I was studying in Tel Aviv. And when I was already back in Vancouver, he knew that gay marriage was a possibility in Canada, so he planned to come to Vancouver to get married. So his last text message to me was, "How much are cell phone plans in
Oh, a lot
Vancouver?"
here.
And I said, "Highway robbery." Yeah.
Carmel, talking from about pain and tikkun, I think that you also have some very interesting story from Israel with some not only Jewish backgrounds and only Jewish families to open the door for you, right?
Yeah. I would say that we have a very unique relationship with an Israeli-Palestinian family, the Mawasi family in Faradis near Zechron Yaakov. My mom would take a taxi from the Rekevet, the train from Binyamina to Zechron Yaakov. And one day um, her taxi driver was razzing her a little bit because he knew that she clearly didn't recognize him, but he had recognized her when we went walking from our apartment to the moshav that has a swimming pool just beneath. And when we arrived, it was a very funny scene because the swimming pool had just redone their tiles, but the person or the company laying down the tiles forgot to glue the tiles. And so when we arrived, all the water had lifted all the tiles. And so all the tiles were floating. And there was a whole group of people, the lifeguards, they're all from Fardis, and we're all laughing hysterically because we came to swim, not realizing that this had happened. And it was a funny moment. Of course, we all chuckled and we're like, okay, I guess we'll come back another time. So he remembered my mom and me. And so he pretended to say, you know what? I know exactly who you are. You're Dahlia and your daughter's Carmel. And my mom in the taxi was very scared because how does this person know who I am? And once he realized that my mom was quite fearful of how does this person know who she is, he explained that he was one of the guys at the swimming pool. And then from that moment on, He became my mom's favorite taxi driver, and they would do a little, sivuv to a falafel stand or to, shawarma, and make detours on their way to the train station. And then after some months of this, he invited my mom, it's time for you to come for a Friday lunch with my family. And my mom did. Now my mom comes from a very conservative Likud background. And so for her to do this, there was a big deal. And from that moment on, our families became extremely close. In fact, they're my mishpacha. These are the first people that I actually texted on October 7th, was this family, just to make sure that they're okay. And they're the people who pick us up from the airport when we come to visit. I'm there more than I am with anybody else in Israel these days. And so much so that I do think that this gives me a different perspective than even a lot of Israelis. And I also used to live with them. There was a time I lived in Faradis for 6 months. And I know that I have not yet met another single Jewish Israeli woman to ever live inside a Palestinian Israeli village, with unmarried single men in the household who have become my brothers. Um, and it was a very, very unique experience. And I'm still honored to have had that experience. And it's given me perspective into a very different world that I would normally not have had the privilege to be a part of. And it also showed me that there's more nuance um, than even previously. It expanded my understanding of the conflict in many different ways. I can go into all of the examples, um, everything from foraging with them for meluchie and akub and porcupine, and being told that it's illegal for them to forage these foods that their families have been foraging for centuries in the area. And finding out from local Israeli environmentalists saying, well, at the rate that they're foraging and eating the porcupine, there won't be any of this left if they don't learn to conserve and to farm effectively. So I see tensions between, traditional way of life, but also how to sustain traditional ways of life. And that's just one example on food. My favorite would be, alei geffen, the stuffed grape leaves. And they make it fantastic. But one particular pot, this one batch, was so good. And they start laughing. I don't know why they're laughing at me eating it. And I was like, oh no, what meat did you put in here? Anyway, they're like, no, it's not the meat, sweetie. It's the leaves. And I had no idea that you could eat the leaves of the rokefet, the cyclamen plant. And that is the national Israeli state flower. And I was like, bull, this is hilarious. This is what I'm eating. And this is why they're laughing. So this is what I got exposed to. And it was really important for me to have that experience. And so when I hear the podcast, Unapologetic, the third narrative, which is from the perspectives of various Israeli Palestinians, I actually can relate much more to what is being spoken there than any other podcast that I have found on the topic, discussing October 7th and the aftermath from that, because I do come from more than one world, and I have experienced more than one world.
And that's also what is so beautiful about this word. And I can also personally relate to as someone who grew up in the Galilee, many times for me, and I also come from a quite conservative family. And many times, actually, my Arab gay friends were my best friends because we could really understand each other. Like, and life are much more complicated than a football game. And this kind of diversities are very, very important. And I think it also leads to the fact that there's a lot of responsibility to anything that we say. And for many people who see themselves as change makers who deal with LGBT issues, but eventually they split the stuff into sides or football games, this is actually something that is really damaging and makes a lot of pain actually to those who care and deal with it. And with that, it's not, this is not what doing Tikkun Olam. This is not the real, at least the way I see it. Carmel, thank you very, very much. Toda raba. Mwah. I love you, dear. I'm so glad that we did that, and I hope that we gave some food for thought. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Toda raba.
Shalom.
Thank you very much.